So once we set up these convolutional layers and we even initialize them from random numbers, we initialize them from scratch without telling the neural network what to detect. It turns out that once we train these neural networks, the convolutional layers naturally learn some primitive features that are very similar to how the visual cortex of mammals is. So we have edge detection neurons in the V1 layer that detect edges in various orientations, and it turns out that if we plot the two-dimensional array of the weights that are learned, let's say if we have a 7 by 7 filter or something like that, or 11 by 11 filter, and we plot them, we visualize them as shapes, then we get these oriented edges. So for example, you can see here that here you can see that here edges of different orientations are being detected in the convolutional layers that are learned organically from natural images. You'll also see that there are color detectors, because color also seem to be important for visual recognition for image analysis tasks. So these are all based on neural networks that were trained on image recognition with random initialization. So what comes out of these images of these convolutional layers is something called a feature map, right? So what is a feature map? So let's say you have an image, right, and this image has a face, okay, and I have a small kernel that detects vertical edges, okay. So by light I mean that it has positive weights, by dark I mean it has negative weights, and I convolve it over this image. So I will get another two-dimensional matrix which will be roughly of the same size as the image itself, and it will detect all the vertical edges, okay, and it will give me zero response on the horizontal edges and in the flat portions of the image where there is no where there is no where there is no variation in the pixel intensity. So here you can see that once I superimpose this particular kernel here, then there will be high correlation with the way the weights are, the shape of the weights, or the way the weights are spatially organized in this kernel, and because of that I will get a high response, and I will get these vertical looking the numbers that form a vertical shape in the output of this convolutional layer, of this convolutional kernel. Whereas here the because we are cutting this uh, convolutional kernel in the middle, we will get a zero response, the top and the bottom will cancel out, and because of that we will get nothing here, right. So because of this, when you look at the response of the first layer, different kernels of the first layer, you will see that these are the vertical edges that were detected, these are the horizontal edges that were detected by another neuron and so forth, another kernel and so forth, and these are perhaps could be some texture or some color that was detected and so forth for some particular image. So this is for the first convolutional layer. After the first convolution layer, things become more complicated if we stack convolutional layers on top of each other. So as you can see that the output itself is a two-dimensional array, so you can run another set of convolutional kernels in the second layer and so forth, and they still maintain some sort of a shape detection type characteristics, but very soon it starts to get lost. So and then the response becomes more and more localized as opposed to like continuous edge detection and so forth, because now you are now we are detecting combinations of features, combinations of edges and so forth, which could be corners, and they are very spatially localized in one part of the image. Um, so that is and then after that, if we go to convolution layer 3 and 4, then the feature maps are very difficult to interpret. You will just see dots, isolated dots. So those could be, for example, eye detection, so it will give you response when it has detected an eye, or a nose detector and so forth. We don't know what it actually detects because they are all trained from scratch, and we let the data determine what is to be detected, okay. So But before we get into that in more detail, let's look at the principal advantage that we got by using convolution over not using convolution. So let's say if we had an image of size 32 by 32 and it had 3 channels which are R, G and B. So now we have a 3-dimensional array or a 3-dimensional tensor of size 32 by 32 by 3. So let's draw it like this. We have 32 by 32 and we have 3. Okay. And from this, from these many numbers, we want to detect a feature map, okay, which is slightly smaller because we don't want to go over the edges. So it is of size 28 by 28. Okay. So this is 32, 32, and this is 28 by 28 because we are using a 5 by 5 kernel, all right. And but we want to detect 25 such features. So the depth now has increased to 25. The number of channels has increased to 25, whereas originally we had only R, G and B, red, green and blue, 3. Okay. So your hidden output is 28 by, or the output of the first layer is 28 by 28 by 25. So if all of the inputs were connected to all of the outputs, the number of weights we would need is 32 by 32 by 3 times 28 times 28 times 25, which is around 60 million weights. That is a huge number of weights to be calculated. The advantage of having so many weights is that you can have a separate feature detector for any location, and it is not even location specific, it actually can detect large shapes from different portions of the image, whereas that's not how mammalian vision works. We detect same features again and again, and to detect that feature we look at only a small neighborhood. That is basically what convolution is about. So if we were to do convolutions, which is weight sharing, we would have a feature of size how much? We would have a feature of size, we would have a kernel of size 5 by 5, let's say, and because it has to examine all 3 input channels, we will have times 3, and because there are 25 such features, times 25. So we have only 1875 weights. Okay. So that's a huge reduction over 60 million. I am not even counting the biases. The reduction in biases is smaller, but in the number of weights, there's a huge number of reduction in weights. There's a large extent of reduction in weights. So what that means is that I can stack many more layers without having an explosion in the number of weights, and that also has a regularization property in the sense that we are forced to detect useful features, features that are useful irrespective of location, so that we make better, more efficient use of the weight budget that is given to us. These are some primary reasons behind the success of convolutional neural networks for image processing. So how will backpropagation work? In this case, because we have an image, right, and we have this kernel, and this kernel not only operates at this location, it also operates at this location and at this location and so forth, to give you this output, this output, this output on the entire output feature map, right. Because of that, all 3 locations are contributing these outputs, all 3 outputs are contributing, and consequently all these 3 inputs, right, are contributing to the gradient descent of the gradient of these weights with respect to whatever is the loss here, okay, after stacking many layers. So basically your backpropagation is not going to treat only each image as a separate sample, it is going to treat each location within the image also as each pixel location also as a separate sample. So all of them are contributing to the tuning of every kernel, and each kernel you can think of it as a repeating neuron. Okay, so it will treat each input patch and not just a sample as something that is contributing to gradient descent. So the other thing that we have been neglecting till now is that we have been very focused on detecting local features, but when you put several local features together, the extent of what we need to detect, the spatial or temporal extent of what we need to detect becomes larger. So what that means is that with small kernels of size 5 by 5 or 3 by 3 or 11 by 11, we can detect small things like edges But if we want to detect like a complete face, or want to do face recognition, or something along those lines, then the number of pixels that we have could be much larger than, let's say, what a kernel can look at. So we need to be able to detect, uh, uh, we need to be able to have outputs that are affected by a large area of the image. So now if we have several layers here and we take one particular output, okay, in every layer we have a two-dimensional grid of outputs. If we take one of those outputs, then the footprint that we have on the original image, where if we change one number we can potentially change this output, right, that is called receptive field. Receptive field. So an example of this would be, let's say if we have a 3 by 3 kernel, right? If I have a 3 by 3 kernel, and then I have the output, and I look at one particular output here. So for this particular output, I can only change inputs in a 3 by 3 neighborhood to potentially change this output via this kernel. Okay. Now on top of that, if I have another 3 by 3 kernel, and then I get another output feature map, right, and I look at one particular output, its footprint here is a 3 by 3, but then its footprint here is going to be a 5 by 5, right. So the receptive field of this neuron is 5 by 5, whereas the receptive field of this neuron is going to be a 3 by 3. Now we want these receptive fields after a few layers to be very large, so that it can look at big objects and do some processing on those objects, or basically recognize those objects, or detect those objects and so forth. Now the challenge with that is that requires many convolutional layers to be put together, whereas we may want a faster way of detecting, of increasing the receptive field. By faster I mean within a few layers we may want to increase the receptive field quite a bit, and while doing so, the parts that we detect, their exact location is not important. As long as they are detected, they are fine. So what that means is, if this eye is slightly shifted to the right, it is still a face. So the exact location of the eye is not important. I want a little bit of a translation invariance to the location of the eye, okay, and scale invariance. The face can be slightly bigger or slightly smaller, eye can be slightly bigger or slightly smaller, it is still a face. So for that, a second type of layer is introduced, which is called a pooling layer, and that is a local summarization layer. So what it does is, let's say if we have a feature map of size h by w, we want to just reduce it to a smaller feature size of size, let's say h by 2 and w by 2. And what we do is, we take a 2 by 2 neighborhood and we just summarize it either by taking an average or taking a max and plotting it in one location. Okay, so that is called average pooling or max pooling. So the math would look like this, that you have xij, where ij run from, let's say, 1 to 224, and we have yij, which is basically nothing but average of a small 2 by 2 neighborhood or a max of a 2 by 2 neighborhood. So there is nothing to learn, there are no parameters, it is just a fixed layer. It just tries to reduce the size of the feature map. Consequently, when you have another conv layer after that, convolution layer after that, the receptive field of the activations of that output of that convolution layer will increase at twice the pace than the one that was before pooling. Okay, so the way we would visualize pooling is that, let's say if this is xij, we would take a small 2 by 2 location, and with that we will just summarize it and plot it here. And then when we will compute the next pooling location, we will not move by 1, but we will move by 2. So now we have non-overlapping stride. Before that we had an overlapping stride. So again we will have something like this. So as you can see that the size of the yellow squares, the number of yellow squares is going to be 2 by 2 less than the number of red squares. So the feature map that we will get is going to be w by 2 and h by 2, where this is w and this is h. So that is called a 2 by 2 max pooling. You can also have 3 by 3 max pooling, where the size reduction is even further. So here basically why we do max pooling or average pooling is that if an eye is detected, okay, and eye detector gives you a high, so let's take a 2 by 2 neighborhood. If one of these value is high and the other values are very low, right, that means eye has been detected in this 2 by 2 location. So before this we had an eye detector, so this, the shape of this matrix was such that it was detecting eyes. So one of them, so it has detected that eye in that in that 2 by 2 neighborhood. That is good enough for us. We will just summarize it as one detection. We don't need to look at whether it was slightly to the left or right, or whether it was slightly bigger or smaller. So basically a typical CNN architecture would be that you have an image, and it could be a color image, okay, and then you would have a convolutional layer. So you will have several convolutional filters, and based on that you will get the convolutional feature map. Okay, and then you will have another set of convolution layer. Sorry, after this you will have a pooling layer. So usually you will have input, okay, conv, pool, conv, pool, etc. So several conv pools together, and then you will get a very small feature map. So that small feature map is, so for example here after that, if I do pool, the feature map is going to be of a smaller size. Same number of channels but a smaller height and width, and then again conv and pool, and then it will become smaller and smaller. So at some point it will become very small. Number of channels will increase. This is number of channels, and but the height and width is going to be very small. So h by 128 by or w by 128 by h by 128, let's say, right, so some power of 2. So it has become quite small. So once it has become quite small, there is no point in doing convolution, because you cannot move left and right on a very small feature map. So because you cannot do that, you will just take this 3-dimensional tensor, stretch it out and make it into a 1-dimensional vector of size whatever, h by 28 by w by 128 times whatever the number of channels, and then we will have, after this we will have fully connected layers, just like a regular neural network, and they will give you the output, which will, the final layer will give you the classification or whatever regression that you want to do. So this will be fed into a fully connected layer. So after that, the same kind of principles apply, that they are the 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 weights are organized as matrices, with the number of inputs being the total number of outputs of the previous layer, and so forth. Okay. So after that we have what is called dense layer or FC layer, fully connected or dense. It is also called dense layer. So several of these, okay, until we get the output, which is also a dense layer. So that is a typical CNN architecture. The other thing to note here is that the size of the feature map, okay, size of feature map is decreases, but number of feature maps increase. Number of feature maps as in the channels increases, and that is because uh, there are more complicated parts to detect, and there are more types of complicated parts as you go deeper into the network. Okay. But to detect those complicated parts, we have to look at larger and larger receptive fields on the original image, and because of that, the size of the feature map, the spatial size, the W and H decrease, but the number of channels, which is C, which is the RGB here, just 3 here, and let's say 25 here and whatnot, that keeps increasing. So now CNNs can not only be applied to images, but they can also be applied to other types of data such as speech. So let's take an example. In speech, what we have usually is something called a spectrogram. So we have the time dimension here, okay, and because of that overlapping bands of frequencies on based on Fourier transform, we will have frequency here. Okay. So what one particular window means is that at that particular time, what is the contribution of a particular frequency range. All right. So different phonemes will have a different frequency temporal structure. Now here, and this is on a log scale. This tessellation is on a log scale, okay, and but time is on a linear scale. So here we can detect same existing feature, which could be like some sort of a speech pattern, either at high frequency for a high pitched person or at a low frequency for a low pitched person, and either earlier in time or later in time. So the same kind of a localization and uh, and repeating pattern principles apply for speech also, and we can use CNNs for speech. Okay. Just as the size of the filter is going to be tailored towards what is the typical size of a particular feature to be detected in speech as opposed to images. Okay. So CNNs can also be used for speech. They can also be used for other data, such as we can have one dimensional CNN as opposed to two dimensional CNNs for processing DNA sequences, for processing protein sequences and so forth. So they have variety of applications. I'll take one more example of CNNs being applied to text. Okay. So if you have a text, the way to encode text is again using 1 hot bit encoding, but it's a slightly cumbersome to encode it as 1 hot bit. So what is text basically? For example, the bear was charging. Okay. So this sentence has 4 words, right, and these 4 words are, and you can have text with various lengths of words. So to encode each word, so here the unit is not a pixel, it's or a pressure point, it's a pressure measurement sample, it is a word. So to encode this word, we would have a giant vector, and the number of dimensions in that vector is going to be size of dictionary. Okay. And only one of them will be 1, rest of them will be 0, 1 hot bit encoding. Which one will be 1? Where whatever is the location for the word the, and similarly the next vector will be for bear, next will be for was, the fourth one will be for charging. So we'll have 4 vectors, and each of them will be 1 hot bit encoded. So now you can think of it as a sequence of vectors where each column is 1 hot bit encoded and different locations are 1. Etc. Right. So this is your location of word, and this is your lexical order or lexicographical order in the position in the dictionary. So now I can treat this as a 2-dimensional input, and I can apply convolutional neural networks to it, but it doesn't work very well with that. What might work better, so first of all, this dimension becomes very large, because we are, let's say if we restrict the dictionary to 10,000 words, even then it is quite large. So the first thing that is done is to convert this 1 hot bit encoding into a smaller vector, but it is a dense vector. It is no longer a sparse vector where there is only 1 1 and rest of them are 0. It is a dense vector. So these are numbers like 0.34, 0.56, etc. And the dimension is going to be small. This dimension is let's say around 300 as opposed to 10,000. Okay. And it's a dense encoding, and this is done by a separate neural network called word embedding neural network, such as GloVe or Word2Vec. So I'll just give you these terms. These are for an advanced course. So let's say a GloVe neural network, and that will give you this encoding or embedding. And once we have that, then there are special CNNs that are called transformers, which have some other special kinds of layer like self attention layers that can operate upon this, and they can actually even process text, not just speech and images and videos and MRIs. So videos will require a 3-dimensional CNN and so forth.